Hello again, this is World News on TVP World with me, Anna Kalczyńska. Overnight, Russia launched mass attacks on Ukraine. In the Zaporizhzhia region, at least 19 people were wounded, according to the most recent reports. Newly released footage from the region shows Ukrainian emergency services working to extinguish fires triggered by the attacks. Ukrainian media reporting that Moscow launched over 770 separate attacks in the region, targeting civilian infrastructure, a gas station and an industrial facility. Over 50 homes were damaged in the attack. But there are also reports coming out of Russia that so far unidentified drones struck the city of Cheboksary, as confirmed by local authorities. U.S. President Donald Trump has said he plans to send his envoys to Ukraine and Russia for further talks on the peace plan proposal. He also made clear that while there's no deadline for Ukraine and Russia to end the war, his administration's 28-point plan is in fact just a concept that can be renegotiated and improved. Some important parts of the deal, including territorial arrangements, still remain to be agreed upon.
Well, that was just a map. All that was is a map. That was not a plan. It was a concept. And from there, they've taken each one of the 28 points, and then you got down to 22 points. A lot of them were solved, and actually very favorably solved. So we'll see what happens.
Do you think that Ukraine was being asked to give too much land back to Russia? I know at one point you said they shouldn't have to give any back.
It's really up. Look. The way it's going, if you look, it's just moving in one direction. So eventually that's land that over the next couple of months might be gotten by Russia anyway. So do you want to fight and lose another 50, 60,000 people? Or do you want to do something now? In some cases, the land is going in the other direction. So they're negotiating, they're trying to get it done. You want to have a border, you can't have a border that goes through a highway or border that goes through the middle of a town, so that doesn't work. So it's a long, complicated process, and very, very sad because so many people are being killed.
What's the next step?
They're going to keep talking. They're talking to Russia now. Steve Witkoff is going over, maybe with Jared. I'm not sure about Jared going, but he's involved in the process. Smart guy, and they're going to be meeting with President Putin, I believe, next week in Moscow.
Next week in Moscow?
I think so, yes.
Bloomberg reports that on October 14th, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff told Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov he could pressure Ukraine and President Donald Trump into accepting a Moscow-friendly peace deal. Witkoff suggested concessions involving Donetsk and possible land swaps, saying Trump would give him discretion to negotiate. The recorded call took place days before President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Washington seeking U.S.-made Tomahawk missiles. Bloomberg reports Witkoff pushed for a call between Trump and Vladimir Putin ahead of that very meeting. Moscow's demands remain maximalist, including recognition of occupied territories as Russian, limits on Ukraine's military, and abandoning NATO aspirations. Kremlin envoy Kirill Dmitriev has denied the authenticity of the recordings. President Trump said he saw nothing unusual in his representative's actions, calling it a standard thing and part of how a dealmaker operates. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that the U.S. peace plan may be transformed into a more substantive agreement. The leader also added that he counts on the U.S. in the peace negotiations.
I have spoken separately with the Prime Minister of the UK, the Chancellor of Germany and the President of Finland. We also worked with the Ukrainian negotiating team on the text of the document that was developed with the US in Geneva. The principles of this document can be developed into deeper agreements. And this is our common interest, for security to be real. I count on further active cooperation with the American side and with President Trump. A lot depends on America, because it is the American power that is most valued in Russia.
France and the United Kingdom will lead a new joint task force aimed at reinforcing post-war security guarantees for Ukraine. Following the video conference of the Coalition of the Willing on Tuesday, officials co-chairing the meeting, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer and Friedrich Merz, released a statement expressing their support for Donald Trump's efforts to end Russia's war against Ukraine. The US and Turkey will also participate in the new task force. The exact placement or responsibilities of the unit are not clear yet. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski and the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio also took part in the call. President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen added that the pressure is only language Moscow understands, and so Ukraine's allies will continue to increase it. The leaders have repeated their calls for Ukraine to be involved in any talks regarding ending the war. London's Starmer announced the UK will deliver more air defense missiles to Ukraine within the next weeks and is ready to cooperate with the European Union on providing financial support to Kiev, basing on frozen Russian assets. Francis Macron added that Paris aims to finalize solutions for financial aid for Kiev. Ian Brzezinski, senior fellow in the Atlantic Council, has criticized the US peace plan, calling it the worst act of appeasement since the Munich Agreement that Chamberlain signed in 1938. Talking to TVP World, Brzezinski criticized the cap on military personnel and territorial concessions, saying none of these measures are being put on Russia.
The 28-point program, which is still evolving, is a horrible starting point for this phase of negotiations. I mean, think about it. It's probably the worst act of appeasement, or near act of appeasement, since the Munich Agreement that Chamberlain signed in 1938, forcing a sovereign nation to give up territory it controls to an aggressor state. That's what this agreement starts off with. It then asserts that that victim has to reduce and have a cap put on its armed forces. It goes on to say that that country can no longer accept foreign allies to come in and help defend its sovereignty and its interests, their interests. It's amazing to me because there are no territorial demands on the aggressor. There are no caps being expected upon the aggressor's forces, the country that attacked Ukraine, and was just attacking Ukraine last night with a brutal barrage of missiles.
Two airports in Brussels are expecting major disruptions, and Belgium is seeking general strikes across the country. Employees from various industries are protesting against the government's attempts at slashing public debt. We are now joined live by our correspondent Kazimierz Łysiak, who is in the Belgian capital. Good morning, Kazimierz. So how long can we expect these strikes to go on for?
Good morning, Anna. This is the third and final day of the general strikes across Belgium. It began on Monday as a way of protest against the various austerity measures that the center-right ruling coalition wanted to introduce. In fact, the coalition made an agreement already on Monday, but workers from various trade unions in Belgium decided to go on with 3-day strikes across the country, with this one on Wednesday being the biggest across all of Belgium. So we are expecting a lot of different disruptions in the city today, not only in the Brussels airport, which has more than 70,000 passengers go through the airport every day. If you're going to or through Brussels, keep that in mind, that you may experience some problems with connections, for example. But there are also issues with the country's biggest rail transport, Eurostar, as well as the metro here in the Belgian capital. So major disruptions, and the government of Prime Minister De Wever wants to cut the government's deficit by €9 billion by 2029. That's why they are introducing these measures. Belgium's debt is rising, so this is the center-right coalition way to cut this deficit. It intends to do so through various cuts of pensions, for example, or unemployment pensions, various kinds of social benefits, which naturally was met with a lot of protest from various trade unions. This is why you have to be on the lookout if you're going for Brussels today for any disruptions in communications.
Thank you so much, Kazimierz Łysiak from the very center of Brussels. And now to Polish news. Polish President Karol Nawrocki has called for the reversal of the EU integration process and the abolishment of the position of President of the European Council. However, government ministers have highlighted that Nawrocki was not speaking on behalf of the Polish government and lacks any legislative road to pursue his agenda.
Poland's President Karol Nawrocki was welcomed to Prague on Monday by his Czech counterpart Petr Pavel. He later used an address to university students to call for fundamental changes to the European Union. Poland's head of state said he wants to curtail EU centralisation, which he claimed would deprive member states of their sovereignty and weaken democratic systems. He called for the abolition of the position of the President of the European Council and changes to the voting system in the EU Council. According to the Polish press agency, Nawrocki presented what he called a Polish programme for the European Union. However, Polish government officials have been quick to highlight that as president, Nawrocki does not speak for the country because foreign policy is not part of his remit.
The president, by putting forward controversial proposals for changes to the principles of the community's functioning, cannot claim to be speaking on behalf of Poland. Because it is the government that conducts foreign policy, and it is the government that decides on our relations with the EU. It is worth coming a little down to earth. I kindly inform you that the Council of Ministers has not authorized the President to submit proposals for amending the European treaties.
While ministers may dismiss the President's calls for EU reform, it is unlikely to stop Nawrocki trying to gain ground in this area.
Polish Justice Minister Waldemar Żurek has said Warsaw will have to, in some way, implement the ruling of the Court of Justice of the European Union on the legality of same-sex marriages across the EU. The Justice Minister added that the Polish constitution does not prohibit same-sex marriages and that Tuesday's ruling will have to be adopted. The EU Court of Justice ruled in a case from Poland that a member state is obliged to recognize a same-sex marriage registered in another EU country, even if the law of that country does not recognize such marriages. The ruling comes after a same-sex Polish couple's wedding in Germany was not honored by the Polish authorities. An agreement has been reached between Poland and Angola at the African Union-European Union summit Tuesday. The agreement involving critical minerals is part of the EU's wider search for resources it needs to meet climate goals and energy independence. Sofia Ba in Luanda has more.
One of the topics on the agenda for the second day of the European Union and African Union summit here in Luanda is critical minerals. Boosting trade of minerals is likely the top priority as EU seeks to secure critical minerals needed for its green transition and to reduce its dependency on China for minerals used in electronic goods. Africa has emerged as a battleground for its critical minerals and energy potential. The EU is trying to deepen their economic ties. However, there are obviously other big players like China, the United States, and Russia. Interestingly enough, talking about the EU, for example, Poland and Uganda have now entered a new phase of cooperation in the mining sector, with the two governments committing to begin joint mineral exploration, support research and technology development, and pursue potential investments. However, we did hear during this summit here in Luanda that African countries do not want to be seen as just a source of exploration for critical minerals. This might be the reason why the Polish and the Ugandan collaboration is based on agreement that the Ugandan resources such as copper and cobalt will be processed in Uganda before leaving the country. Sofia Ba, TVP World, Angola.
And on that, we conclude this edition of World News. But please stay tuned to TVP World for more news and comments.